a lie when I first heard it, based on how exciting and how excitable she was when she was telling the story. But what I've discovered about this woman, and I alluded to this earlier, is I've discovered that although she's blind and has to have a walking stick, and she's probably the most happy person that I've ever talked to. I mean, the kind of person that when she calls me, it's like, "Hey, Dark, what's going on?" Like raises my spirit. So, I can say that I'm truly honored and blessed to be able to share her encounter. I believe her encounter is 100% true. I'm happy that it worked out the way it did. And you know, guys, I kind of stray away from Dogman because I think that a lot of the stuff that comes with Dogman lately has just been straight up bullshit. I'm gonna be honest with you. And then with the overreaching people, they won't call it Dogman, but they call it werewolves, and then they just put out 1,000 fucking stories that are just insane. I'm very, very selective now on the Dogman stuff, and I have a lot of good Dogman stuff that I'm holding on to. But this one was one that I promised her that I would tell, and so, my lady, that's your story, and I hope you enjoyed it because I enjoyed talking to you. And as you know, you can call me anytime. All right, guys, those are the two stories that I wanted to share with you guys for the Out of Left Field. I hope you enjoyed them. What's coming up next is I'm doing some Bigfoot Bonanza. That is pretty much done. Then we're going to go to some stories that I got about pterodactyls, or I don't even call them pterodactyls. I would call them thunderbirds. Some thunderbirds. And then I'm not sure what comes after that, to be honest with you guys. You know, I'm toying with doing my very first, where you take kind of like the top 5, blah, blah. You know how people do the top 5, blah, 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 blah. Well, taking one particular topic and taking a documentary format to kind of explain the details of what's what, along with the stories and blending them in. I'm toying with doing that. I started to try and do it with Dogman, but I just decided I don't even want to do it. And so I'm thinking about doing that with these vampire stories that are here. The problem I have with the vampire stories is some of the stories that I have are so true and they've been vetted so much that even to put them out, I'm afraid. I'm not afraid, but I'm scared. Fuck it. I'm afraid to put those stories out. And if I can wrap them in and weave them into something else, I would feel a lot more comfortable. You know, I really would feel a lot more comfortable. So, yep. But anyway, that is it for Out of Left Field, ladies and gentlemen. I'll do a little editing to this. Not a lot. I'll add a little music to it. And then you got it. A Dogman encounter happened early one morning. You see, as a trucker, I spend very long hours on the road. And oftentimes, I tend to push myself a little bit further than I need to when driving. This particular day, I'd been driving and started to feel sleepy. So I stopped at Love's truck stop, just off Highway 10 and 90. I got the truck backed in and situated, then climbed to the back seat and went to sleep. When I woke up, it was about 6:45 a.m. So I headed into Love's, grabbed a shower and some breakfast, coffee, and got back on the road. I was headed to Sierra Vista. As I got on the roadway, the sun was just rising. One of the best things about being a truck driver is the views. Since I was a little kid, I've absolutely loved taking long road trips, and I was always fascinated about the terrain and how it changes across the U.S. I turned, taking 90 south, heading towards Sierra Vista, traveling about 65 miles an hour. And just as I'm passing Cavern State Park, I see something leaping across the roadway on my left-hand side. As I got closer to it, this thing was standing in the median, looking at my truck. Then it takes one leap and clears the entire roadway. Now this is a 2-lane highway, 15 feet per lane at least, and about 8 feet on each side as a buffer. So this thing jumped damn near 40 to 50 feet. And when I say leaped, you should have seen the trajectory of this thing. It jumped up, and had I been closer, it would have easily cleared the hood of my rig. And what it looked like a giant black wolf is all I can tell you. Everything happened so fast, and I know this sounds crazy, but while it was in the air, I could have sworn as this thing took a quick glance at me. Freaked me completely the fuck out. I've heard people on these talk shows saying they go out looking for these creatures. Well, I'll tell you what I saw, no one should be looking for. The muscle mass on this thing was ridiculous. Its arms and shoulders, and I guess you would call it its thighs, were massive. And the speed at which it moved, like nothing I've ever seen. I did tap on my brakes and look through my side mirror once I passed that spot. And this thing was just walking off the roadway. It seemed like my presence didn't faze it at all. Nor did the presence of my truck. I'm not sure what it was or where it comes from, but I don't ever want to encounter that thing again. In my early 20s, I worked for a company that had a contract with the U.S. government at the border. And no, I was not a Border Patrol agent. I worked as part of a maintenance program. My job was to maintain the border fences and manage crews of workers. Now, this job was intense. Not only did you have to contend with the weather, but there was a constant flow of illegal aliens and contraband across the border. The illegals posed a minor threat. Most of the times they would hide from you or run away. But the cartel and drug smugglers were a whole nother story. They would kill you at any moment. Although the job was dangerous, our company didn't permit us to carry firearms. However, my crew and I always carried a weapon because we figured our lives were more important than any job. I remember going through the safety training class and how the instructor would joke saying that we should stay in pairs of 2s and 3s. He would say 4 eyes are always better than 2. While in class, a few rumors began to circulate about reasons why this contract had such high turnover. There were some guys that got killed by the cartel, and other guys started seeing strange things in the sky at night. I pretty much heard it all over coffee and smoke breaks. Outside of the cartel business, I believed everything else was bullshit. But there was one exception. Nowadays, you call it Dogman. They didn't call it Dogman around the office, though. They called it DX587. So when people initially talked about it, I figured it was some kind of experimental weapon or a freaking robot that they used to patrol the border. We would have tailgate meetings in the morning, and our supervisor would say stuff like, "There are DX587s working in Zone 6. I want you guys to stay clear of that area and work Zone 4. They talked about it real casually, so I figured, hey, don't worry about it. Besides, most of the guys I worked with had never seen it. That was until one afternoon. 2 of my crew members and I were out in Zone 6 repairing a fence. Some illegals had taken a blowtorch to the fence, cutting through the 3-foot metal rods and creating a hole that you could simply drive a truck through. Until that day, I'd never seen DX587. Hell, to be honest with you, by that time, I figured it all was some bullshit. I figured the cartel had paid our supervisors to come up with this story about DX587 just to keep us out of the areas where they'd be trafficking the drugs through. I never actually imagined that DX587 actually existed, and it was a real threat. Back to what I was saying. We're in Zone 6, and I'm working a spider crane trying to replace the metal that had been damaged. Sandy and Brent, the other 2 guys with me, are trying to hold on to this rod and guide it into its foundation. That's when we see a group of people running towards us. It had to be 30 people, most of them men. They were running north towards the U.S. border. Now our viewpoint was elevated, so we had a damn good view of this. Sandy, one of the guys who had been working in this area the longest, was one of those slow talkers, and he said, "Them people getting chased by something. I'm not sure what it is, but they running for their lives. It's time we get moving." The crowd was still a good distance away, and we decided we should start loading the truck. But that's when we started hearing screams and growling sounds. We all just stood there frozen, and it started to sink into us that this was DX587 at work. This creature actually fucking existed. Through my binoculars, I could see what looked like 2 huge dogs chasing these people. At first, I just figured they were being chased by a pack of wild dogs. Very big dogs, but yet just wild dogs. That was until I saw one of the dogs stand up on his 2 hind legs. For a second, I thought I was tripping. So I threw the binoculars to Sandy, telling him to take a look and not telling him exactly what I saw. And at first, he thought it was funny. He said, "Look at them dogs, having a field day with them." Then he went silent and said, "What the hell? That ain't no dogs." That's when he tossed me the binoculars and started tightening the straps on the truck, and we left. When we returned to the yard, it was dark, but our manager was still there in the office. This is where the strange part really starts to happen. He apologizes to us and said, "You guys should not have been in Zone 6 today." He went on to explain that he made a mistake in his morning briefing. He then said, "What you saw today was DX587 that we've been trying to avoid. I'm happy you guys are safe, but I'm going to have to let you go. Now, at this point in time, I'm completely pissed off. I asked him, first of all, how did you know what we saw today? Because none of us told him what we saw. Secondly, how are you going to let me go because I saw something? I was just doing my job. That went absolutely nowhere. And yes, we were fired because of what we saw. I was given a $13,000 severance check the very next day. And when that finally calmed down, I approached my supervisor like a man and said, hey, what the fuck is all this about? And that's when he tied it all in this neat knot. He simply said we would never get any work done if people really knew what was out there. In other words, we would pay it off to be silent and go away, so they can keep their government contract and have a steady flow of workers. Ain't that a bitch?
Pirates and Mermaids.
When Ben showed up again, he wasn't alone. He had these 3 guys with him. The first thing I noticed about one of them was that he looked like Ralph Macchio from The Karate Kid. The second guy, who introduced himself as Chef, was about 6 feet tall, and there was no way to avoid looking at the scars he had all over his hands, arms, and face. And the third guy looked kind of foreign, and I didn't like the look in his eyes. He just made your skin crawl. You could feel it. Like this guy wasn't missing some of his screws, but all of his screws. Even when he smiled at me, it just looked fake, like he didn't even know how to use his facial muscles to make a smile. That's when Ben asked if we had done our part and gotten the supplies we needed. But he used this authoritative tone, almost like he was in charge. And based on his tone, I knew in that very moment that it was just a matter of time before Roger and Ben would start bumping heads. And holy shit, let me tell you, when they did, it was explosive. The following day, we boarded our plane and headed to Caracas, Venezuela, a 3-hour flight. Then we headed on a 22-hour flight to Liberia. And it was on this 22-hour flight that the ice began to break, starting with Ben. He told us more about the intel on Sorkin, and he went deep into why he fucking hated it. You see, a few years ago, he was working on a private security mission for Sorkin, protecting some freight ships right off the coast of Africa. And back then, he worked with this guy that he was really close to called Babyface. He had gotten that nickname because he was the spitting image of the notorious mobster Babyface Nelson. Babyface and Ben had worked over 22 jobs together, and during that time, they got extremely close. On this particular mission, Ben, Babyface, and 15 other men were protecting this freight ship. Now, they was under the impression that the only thing they had to do was protect the oil on the ship. And that's when pirates attacked. 6 small boats, Somalis with AK-47s, RPGs, and these fuckers weren't playing. For the most part, this conflict was just target practice for them. That was until 2 of the boats got close enough to the front of the ship and allowed 6 of the pirates to board. They killed 8 of the contractors and were firing RPGs from an elevated position atop some cargo containers. Once the Somalis got that kind of advantage, Ben and Babyface were forced to flee to the hull of the ship. And when they got below deck, Ben said that he realized the ship had been modified. It looked like a standard ship up top, but down below, it was like nothing he'd ever seen before. The 2 of them quickly devised a plan. They were going to work their way to the front of the ship, come back up, and flank these bastards from behind. Ben told us they had been moving through the ship for about 3 to 5 minutes when they started to take fire below deck. And this wasn't coming from the pirates. These were other contractors. Hold your fire! Hold your fire! We're with you! Hold your fire! But they didn't stop. Now they were in a fucked up situation. They had pirates up above them, and God knows who this was in front of them shooting. It took Ben and Babyface 10 minutes to move forward using suppressive fire, pushing the guys back. And that's when they came across this room. And inside, a massive tank filled with water, a monitoring station with cameras showing everything going on above deck. Inside of the first tank was this creature, and it looked like a woman. In fact, it had breasts like a woman, but the thing was, it had these webbed fingers, and its skin had this greenish blue tint. Ben said the thing that stuck out to him the most was how massive this thing's legs were. It made its upper body look small, In the second tank was another creature, this one male. Now, while Ben and Babyface stood there distracted looking at these things, they started taking fire from across the room, and Babyface was hit in the head. Blood, brains, and teeth exploded all over Ben. That's when his eyes glossed over, and you could tell he was becoming emotional. Then he changed the subject to Alessandro. Ben went on to tell us that Alessandro was the single most dangerous operative he knew. Ben said that in order to be successful, we needed to be patient and wait on our opportunity to grab him. After we had our hands on him, we would let Scissors take care of the rest.
Chinese dissidents and MI6 agents. Time was up and everyone had done their jobs. Mary had made contact with the two inside men who were able to confirm two things. Number one, that they could get us inside of Sorkin's building with the clearance to go to any level. And number two, that the underground parking lot was not a parking lot at all. It was a series of underground labs where Sorkin was doing genetic experiments. Now, only one of them had access to the lowest levels of the complex. And he told her that what they were doing down there was pure evil. The only problem was the contact was not able to confirm what kind of experiments were being conducted. And therefore, we were walking into this situation blind. For all we knew, Sorkin could be developing super soldiers, and we would be walking into certain death. The team left on a Friday morning heading to Chengdu, China, a 22-hour flight. It was myself, Roger, Ben, Scissors, Kid, and Chef. That was quiet on this flight for the first 6 hours, until Roger broke out a bottle of whiskey, and everyone got to drinking. As time passed, I could feel us starting to become a team again. Scissors and Kids towards the back of the plane discussing what part of China had the better looking women, Shanghai or Beijing. Roger and Ben reviewing the intel, and Chef was reading a cookbook. Things were starting to feel normal again. But this was just the calm before the storm. Because from the moment we landed in China, things would start moving fast, extremely fast. When we landed, Ben's cell phone rang, and it was Mary's husband, asking him if Ben had spoken with Mary. He said that she hadn't come home, and it was unusual for her. Her movements were like clockwork, which later on we would find out it was this exact same predictability of movement that was Mary's problem. We drove north for 5 hours into the mountainous regions until we got to the city where Chung lived. And I'll tell you, the Chinese countryside is beautiful, rolling hills and mountains, but the people there lived in abject poverty, like nothing I've ever seen. Remember the old black and white movies where there was this villain that lived along the side of a mountain or a hill, like Count Dracula's castle, sitting on top of a mountain looking down on the poor masses of peasants? This is exactly how Sorkin's building was set up. High on a mountaintop, houses were cascading down the mountainside into this small valley. This was some straight modern day medieval bullshit going on. These people didn't even have power, but this building was shining brightly as the sun set behind the mountain. We were told that we could find Chung, the person we needed to make contact with, near the center of town. And I swear to you guys, we have it lucky in the United States. The way these people were living was heartbreaking. Roger was the only one of us who was able to speak a little bit of Mandarin, and it didn't take long before a kid walked up to us and started pointing towards this rickety building. Outside, some men were sitting at a table drinking tea. Approaching the building, the men quickly stood up, walking away, scattering in all different directions. In that moment, I thought this was some type of setup and these men were clearing out before we got hit. But then I realized that Ben was trailing behind the group, and compared to the smaller physiques of these Chinese men, Ben looked like a Viking god. The little boy motioned for us to follow him into this building and pointed to a table. Remember I told you how poor these people were? It's a stretch to call this thing that we were about to sit at a table. And as Roger and I sat down, everyone else took up positions. Ben stood outside of the front door. Chef, Scissors, and Kid spread out around the room. And we watched as this little boy walked through this beaded curtain, heading into darkness. A few minutes later, out walks this guy who looks like he's been through the meat grinder. He had a wound on the side of his head like someone damn near cracked his skull in half. And his right eyeball was completely white. This dude looked like someone had fucked him up. He sits down at the table with us and introduces himself as Chung. Then he reaches behind his back, pulls out an envelope, and hands it to Roger. Then stands up and tells us to follow him into the back. We walk through that beaded curtain through this little doorway, and it opens into a kitchen. Through that kitchen, which connects to a second building. Then up a set of stairs that seem like we have been walking forever, passing through people's houses, other kitchens. We eventually emerged into this open area, and we were halfway up the mountain. He stops, points, and says, "This is it, the building you came for. Can you destroy it?" By now it was nighttime, and the building really did look like some type of evil castle, fully lit up, high above the peasants below. That's when Chung went on to tell us about how women had been going missing in the area. So many that he organized a protest a few years ago, and over 1,000 people took to the streets to petition the government to close down the building. However, instead of the communist Chinese government supporting its citizens, the army came rolling in, beating and shooting the protesters. After the crowd had dispersed, they realized that some of the people had been taken hostage. They tortured them to find out who organized this protest. Next thing you know, Chung's wife and daughter are killed right in front of him. Tears welled up in his eyes as he told us how they dragged their bodies down the same steps we had just walked up. And I'll tell you, I was completely and utterly...
This encounter happened to me in 2016. And I'll admit to you, at that point in time, I found myself in a strange place. I had recently lost my job, and if it wasn't for the substantial amount of savings that I had, man, I really would have been screwed. But as time passed on and my savings started to dwindle from paying rent and bills, I decided the best thing for me to do was to live out of my van. So I decided I was going to have the most epic road trip. Take 90 days, travel around, enjoy the world, and then try and find another job. Now pause right here. Let me say this to you. I started playing poker when I was 12 years old. My dad taught me how to play poker at the kitchen table. I played with him and his friends. When I tell you him and his friends were poker sharks, I'm talking about the kind of guys that played in poker tournaments and won. And so while I was traveling on the road, and when I got low on money, I would stop by a local casino and wait for an evolution of people to come to the table that were suckers. Now, if you don't know this about poker, there's always somebody who's at a poker table who's too aggressive, or there's somebody who's too afraid. And if you know how to pinpoint their tendencies, you can walk into a casino with $150 and walk out with $1,000 if you know what you're doing. Now, the circumstances that led up to my Dogman encounter weren't directly correlated to the fact that I played poker. It was more correlated to the fact that I was low on money and I was heading to play some poker. I find myself on the road, I-20, headed from Marshall, Texas to Shreveport, Louisiana when I get a flat tire. It's 2:30 a.m. and I'm not sure if you're familiar with I-20, but people speed on I-20 and it's pitch black out there. I'm trying to change this tire while my vehicle is on an incline on one of those steep Texas hills. When I tell you this was a hairy situation I found myself in, this was a rough one because I wanted to make sure that my vehicle didn't roll backwards. So I went into the woods, found rocks, came out, put rocks behind the front tires, and I'm sitting there working to jack this van up into the air and put the spare tire on when a pickup truck pulls up behind me. Now, 2 o'clock in the morning, the pickup truck pulls up on you on the side of the road. There are bright lights on, and you got to be prepared for anything. So now I'm standing there with the tire iron in my hand as this young man gets out of his vehicle and says, "Hey, sir, how can I help you?" And let me say this. This gentleman was the most pleasant person I have ever met in my life. He walks over to me. He says, "Hey, I saw you on the side of the road. I figured you needed some help. Do you mind if I help you get your tire changed and make sure you get back on the road safely?" Listen, there are times when being a poker player and being able to read people is an advantage. And this was one of those times. This kid didn't give off any bad vibes whatsoever. In fact, I felt like I was safe just because he was around. And so we get to changing the tire, and he starts talking to me, and he says, "Where are you going?" And eventually I start telling him a little bit about my story. Telling him I'm headed to a casino because I need to play some poker, because I need to make some money, and I've been traveling around in my van. He starts to ask me where I've been. Just as we've got the spare tire on and I'm putting the other tire in the back of the van, he says, "When's the last time you went to church?" I look at this kid, and by kid, I mean 23, 24 years old. And I said, "Quite frankly, I haven't been to church in years." That's when he goes on to explain to me that he's a youth pastor at a place called Church of Uncertain. Now stop, pause right here. I done heard a whole bunch of church names. The Church of Christ, the Church of the Latter-day Saints, St. Elmo's Church, St. Pius Church. I had never heard of anything called Church of Uncertain. So now I'm standing there thinking to myself, okay, all right, this kid's probably in some kind of cult, and that's why he's giving off this vibe. Now, as I'm shaking his hand to thank him, he says, "Listen, I pulled over on the side of the road because God wanted me to stop and talk to you. And so if you just allow me for a few seconds, let me share something with you." And right there on the side of the road in the middle of the morning, he shared the gospel of Jesus Christ with me and invited me to come to his church. Now, something weird happened when I shook this man's hand. This feeling came over me, this feeling of peace, like no matter what was going on, everything was going to be all right. He hands me this little business card with the church's address and says, "Listen, next time you're coming in this direction, stop by the church on a Sunday morning. I would love to see you there." And then he turns around, gets in his vehicle, and leaves. I head on into Shreveport, pull into the casino parking lot, catch a couple of Z's. The next day I go to the poker table, and when I tell you I rack in the money, I go in the door with $250 and leave out with $2,500. $2,500. When I finally head back to the van, I'm laying there catching some sleep, and it dawns on me, I think I'm going to go check out this church, the Church of Uncertain. Now, stop right here and let me say this in the story. What happened to me next had absolutely nothing to do with this church. I'm 100% certain of that. These were phenomenal people, real homely people. Everyone knew each other, kind, sweet, loving. But when I left there, what I encountered, boy, it was the exact opposite. So I head on over to a tire shop, get a new tire, come back to the casino, do some more gambling. I gamble all day Saturday, go back to the van, go to sleep, wake up in the morning, and I start heading to this address in a town called Uncertain, Texas. Now, let me say this about these people at this church. First of all, I want to thank them. And I did thank them before I left, because it was during that church service at the Church of Uncertain in Texas that I realized something. I realized that my life wasn't bad off at all. And in fact, I realized that God loved me so much that as a 12-year-old little boy, I learned how to play poker, and I was able to sustain myself from a skill that I learned at 12 years old. But I also learned that day when the pastor was preaching that God wanted more for me. Also, after church, we had a bite to eat, and it was just the most amazing experience. It felt like being at home with family. And that youth pastor who helped me on the side of the road, he was there. And when I tell you this young man was ecstatic to see me, he was absolutely ecstatic to see me. Now, let me say this to you. What happened after leaving that church, I do not attribute it to the church or God or anything else.
I really just believe I picked the wrong place to decide to spend the night. Because I head on over to a campground right around Cato Lake, park my van, hang out outside, smoke a few cigarettes, listen to music, relax, chill. I mean, it was an awesome day. One of the most awesome days I had in quite a long time. And then the freaking sun went down. And when I tell you, there's nothing more spooky than the border of Texas and Louisiana. When the sun goes down, man, I tell you, there's nothing more spooky than that. 9 p.m. rolls around. I got everything locked down. I got my seatbelts attached to my door handles so nobody can sneak into the vehicle. I lay it down, I go to sleep, and wham. And I'm not sure if you ever heard the sound of sharp nails scratching on glass, but I learned at 1 a.m. that's exactly what I was hearing. This high-pitched screeching sound. And when I open my eyes and move the curtains, I see this paw, not a hand, a giant paw with these long nails just scratching along the window on the back side of my van. Now stop, pause right here, and let me say this. At first, in my mind, this was somebody playing a joke on me. I'm thinking, okay, they got some local kids in the area. Maybe it's some kids from the church, or maybe it's some of their friends. I don't know who it is, but they decide they're going to come out here and they're going to play a joke on me. And it wasn't until the van began to slide, not shake, but slide, that I realized that no, this is not a game. There is something outside of my van strong enough to push this van like it's the Incredible Hulk, and it is sliding my van towards 2 trees. Now, let me say this to you. I'm looking through the window trying to see what's pushing the van, and all I see is fur. Imagine if your German Shepherd or your Collie was big enough to where it put its waist up against the back window of your van, and that fur was pressed up against the glass. That's all I'm seeing. So now I go into panic mode. Mind you, I am in nothing but boxers. I hop up, climb to the front of the van, unbuckle the seatbelt, get into the front seat, crank it up, and start to drive off. As I'm driving off, this thing is pushing the van, forcing me to go in circles. I'm talking about my foot is down on the gas, and it is pushing me, forcing me to spin around in circles. When I look through the side view mirror, is the very first time I get a glimpse at what people call Dogman, and this thing was massive. Gigantic shoulders, big old biceps, huge legs. It has its upper body pressed up against my van like it's doing push-ups. And I'm saying to myself, I am about to die. I'm not sure why I was doing this. Maybe I was panicking, but I decided to blow the horn and just lay my hand on the horn. Burn! If anybody was nearby, they would hear the horn blowing and they would come and help me. Now, as I start to blow the horn, the van stops spinning and starts moving straight forward. But now I'm headed through the trees, headed towards the lake. And so now I have to cut the wheel, dodge trees, spin the van around, dodge more trees, and get back onto the roadway. As I'm cutting that wheel and heading back to that roadway, I see this thing making a beeline straight for me, running on its hind legs. Let me say this to you. Back in those days, I wasn't the kind of guy who carried guns on him. In fact, I felt there was no need for a gun, but after this encounter and this experience, trust me, I have loads and loads of guns. But I'm driving off, it's making this beeline for me, and it goes into this cluster of trees. And truthfully, I've been thinking about this for years, trying to figure out why did it stop in that cluster of trees? Why didn't it go any further? But it gets into this cluster of trees, and I don't know if it couldn't fit through them or if it didn't want to run over them. I don't know what the reason was. But it gets into that cluster of trees, and it just stops. But me, I don't stop driving. I don't stop driving until I get back on I-20 and start headed back to Shreveport. When I'm on I-20, I pull over, hop in the back of the van, throw my clothes on, drive back to the casino, and park in a damn parking lot.
As the clock strikes midnight and the world quiets down, a different life stirs. Dark Waters Channel reigns supreme over the late-night domain on YouTube. With every tale, a masterpiece of shadows and whispers, we craft the night with the art of storytelling. Be part of our kingdom where the night is never just darkness but a canvas for the extraordinary. Dark Waters Channel, where late night is our kingdom.
Jackson, Mississippi is where I live, and digging graves is what I've been doing my entire life. In fact, after I dropped out of high school as a teenager, it was the only job I could find. Now, doing this job out here in the cemetery, I've seen my fair share of scary things. Ghosts, shadow men, hellhounds, and for a long time, I thought I had seen it all. That was until early one summer morning. I'm prepping for a funeral. The grave had already been dug, and I was just setting up chairs and decorating. Understand, dealing in the business of death is tough enough. Watching families cry and suffer over and over, day in and day out, takes a toll on you mentally. Listen, me sharing with you the mental stress of my job is no way an indictment on my mental health. I am sane, I'm not crazy, I don't take any meds, my life is good. Anyway, so I'm there, and the cemetery is nestled into the woods. And by that, I mean you have to drive through the woods to get to the cemetery. It's one of the older black cemeteries in Mississippi. And so you can understand what I mean by old. There are literally dead slaves buried in a section of this cemetery. No headstones, no nothing. Picture this, the sun is rising, but there's this mist still hovering above the ground. And looking to my left, I see something moving so fast that it smears this mist, just like an artist painting with a paintbrush. At first, I'm thinking to myself, look, it must be one of the spirits out here moving around. Nothing to be afraid of, nothing to worry about. No smell of sulfur or nothing like that. So I'm thinking it's a ghost, not a demon, and I get back to work. Then again, out the corner of my eye, I see this thing dart through the mist. So fast that the only sign it was there was the movement of the mist itself. The next thing I hear is this growling, and then the sound of this impact on flesh. Let me explain it to you. Have you ever tenderized a steak and you're sitting there and you're punching it and beating it? You know that kind of wet, plopping sound that your fist makes when it meets that meat? That it was that exact same sound, but so loud that it had an echo. And let me tell you, after that, all hell broke loose. There was this low-pitched humming sound, followed by these growls so strong like nothing I ever heard, combined with the sound of metal twisting and bending. Keep in mind, all of this commotion is going on in the mist about 50 to 60 yards away from me. Then I see this thing that looks like a freaking monster from a sci-fi movie. Triangle head, this blackish gray metallic skin, long claws. This thing comes flying out of the mist about 6 feet above the ground like Hercules had just slung it, and slams into a tree. And I lie to you not, the only way to describe this is it was like something out of a movie. It hits the tree so hard it takes a chunk out. Hits the ground, Bounces back up. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's your boy Dog Waters. I'm hoping that you enjoyed this story so far. It really is a good one. I'm getting back in my bag, in my production bag like I used to be. So you guys got some really good stuff coming. Head on over to the website iamdogwaters.com to check it out and listen to the entire story. And for those of you who are new to my channel and hearing this for the first time, head on over to iamdogwaters.com to become a member.
More than half of the country will feel the effects of a heat wave over the next 24 hours.
By the weekend, at least 14 states are expected to break temperature records. CBS News weather producer David Parkinson joins us now to talk about this heat wave. So just how bad is it expected to be, Dave?
It's bad, and it is expanding in scope. So here's the situation. It was primarily contained to sort of the plains states on Wednesday. It expands today further east into the Ohio River Valley. By the time we get to tomorrow, it's throughout the East Coast. So by and large, when we take a look at the number of people that we're being impacted here with, we're looking at 150 million people under heat alerts. By the time we get to Saturday, 250 million people will actually be seeing high temperatures above 90 degrees. So it's a really, really uncomfortable situation.
And it's not just the heat, it's the humidity?
That's right. The old adage is absolutely correct. So let me explain what's going on here. Basically, you've got transport of Gulf moisture. You also have Barry's moisture. All of that together is making things exceptionally humid. You're getting all of this moisture on the ground. So you're getting these insanely high dew points. When we take a look at what the dew points are in some of the central sections of the country, we're looking at a dew point of 84 degrees in Mankato, 80 in Waterloo, Iowa, and 78 in Oshkosh. What that translates to in terms of when we look at the numbers, the high temperatures aren't that bad. It's 90 in Waterloo, 91 Mankato, 93 in Oshkosh. But look at those feels-like temperatures. 104 in Waterloo, 110 in Mankato. That's what an 84-degree dew point does to you. So the reason why I bring that up is it is a rinse and repeat situation throughout the country.
Let me start here. I've had a hell of a lot of Dogman encounters, but at the time I was having those encounters, I wasn't sure what was going on. It all started on one of those blazing summer days. I remember it clear as day because all over the news they were talking about this heat wave. Dutch, my German Shepherd, had just bolted out of the back door. Now pause. Let me tell you a little bit about Dutch. Dutch is my best friend. Hell, he's my only friend. And around my property, which is 22 acres, Dutch roams freely. That particular day, we were on the backside of the property fixing some fence posts when Dutch takes off running into the wood lines, quickly backs out, and then starts jumping up and down playfully. Then he takes off into the woods. Now, listen to me. Him taking off into the woods, again, it's nothing new to me. It didn't even cross my mind as being a threat. Time passes, and by time passing, I mean just enough time for me to realize that he's been gone too long. So I start calling him, Dutch, come here, boy. Dutch, come here. Now, looking back on all the events that have happened, I believe right now at this moment is when I had my first encounter. Because I hear this running through the woods, quick, heavy, bipedal footsteps. These footsteps are loud, louder than any human footsteps in the woods that I've ever heard. But get this, the next thing you know, the footsteps stop and Dutch comes running out of the wood line. He pauses, takes a look back into the woods, then walks over to me. Now, over the next few days, Dutch's behavior started to change. It was almost like he was working on shifts or something. He would be going into the woods for 30 minutes, then he'd come back. Then he'll leave me going for like 40 minutes, and he'll come back. Listen to this. That Saturday night, we're sitting on a sofa watching TV.
when Dutch walks over to the window, stands there, and just starts looking out. Then he heads to the back door and starts whining and whimpering. Now I'm thinking, okay, maybe the dog has used the bathroom, so I open the door. He takes off running full speed into the darkness. Again, in retrospect, I should have known something was off, because that night he came back with blood all over his body. I check, and it's not his blood. He wasn't hurt, he wasn't injured, just his whole body was bloody. The following day, I head back to the backside of my property to finish working on the fence and find a dead deer carcass, head ripped from the body and partially eaten. Now listen to this. That very same night, Dutch starts crying and whining at the back door, trying to leave to go outside, but I refuse to open the door. Head into the bathroom, and when I come back, my back door is open and he's gone. Now, look, I'm freaking out because I live in a small town, the kind of place where you don't have to lock your doors. My closest neighbor is 3 miles away. Dutch ain't opening no doors for himself. So I grab my rifle, head outside, and start circling the house looking around. Now, this is when I believe I first laid my eyes on Dogman, but I did not know what I was seeing. I have this small garage/workshop that I have about 25 yards away from my house, right? Mounted on that structure is this small motion sensor light. The light comes on, and for a brief second I see this thing running. It's on 2 legs, tall as the garage, and fast. By fast, I mean it's very fast. It runs past, and the next thing you know, there's Dutch chasing behind it. But not like he was trying to attack it or try and kill it. It was this playful jumping and leaping, chasing behind this creature. So now I'm standing there in the darkness calling him, Dutch, come here, boy, Dutch, come here. It takes a few minutes, but soon I see him running in my direction. He runs past me up to the back porch and starts drinking water. Now, I'm sure you're thinking to yourself right now, this guy's full of shit. There's no way he saw that and didn't freak out. Listen to me. I'm not telling you that I wasn't afraid. I'm not telling you that I wasn't in shock. I was completely confused by what I saw. But again, Dutch is my best friend. And if there was a real threat, I figured Dutch would have been behaving as such. But he wasn't. Get this, Dutch and I go back inside, and the next morning, there's a hog. I mean a 250-pound hog right on my back porch. Its neck is broken, but other than that, it's a perfectly good hog. So I take the hog, skin it, take the guts, throw it over in the woods, slap it on the grill, and start cooking me a meal. Now, that particular day, Dutch didn't go into the woods. He just stuck around the house, munching on this hog with me. Now, the next thing that happened was freaking creepy and very, very scary. Nighttime comes. I'm in the kitchen. I hear the back doorknob turning, then something pulling on the door, but it's locked. Now, Dutch is at the door, whimpering and whining, trying to go outside, but that night, I forced him to stay inside. The activity goes on for about a month. Deer, hogs left at my back door. Dutch running off into the woods. The doorknob shaking in the middle of the night. And I figured whatever this thing is, had to be harmless. Because based on what I saw and everything that it did, if it wanted to hurt me, it could have just ran through the walls of the house and got me. If it wanted to free Dutch from inside of the house based on the size of what I saw, it could have ripped the door frame off. Now listen to this. Just as I'm getting comfortable with the new dynamics of what's going on around my property, suddenly, one day, it just stopped. No more hogs, no more deers. Dutch wasn't whining or crying to go outside at night, and he seemed sad and depressed. That depression lasted for about a week, then he went back to normal. Now, listen to me. I know what people say about these dogmen. They're horrifying, mean, terrible killers. But that wasn't my experience. And that wasn't Dutch's experience either. I believe he made a friend. And in turn, I made a friend. Never once was this thing aggressive. It seemed to me like it just wanted to play. Okay, so this Randonautica app is crazy. Let me start by saying this. If I was you, I wouldn't try it. Because I did, and it led me directly to a freaking Dogman encounter outside of Taylor, Mississippi. Now, like many of you, I saw this app online and decided to give it a try. The way it works is you download the app, answer a few questions, tell it how many locations you want, and then you turn around and focus your intent on what you want. So I start off Hattiesburg, Mississippi, pick 4 locations. It tells me to focus my intention on what I want, so I start thinking about all the Dogman stories I heard. And I think about the video I saw out of Fort Pierce, the photos. And after a few seconds, these random coordinates pop up. Now I watch a lot of these videos, and the majority of the people who use this app encounter something creepy, but on a scale of 1 to 10, it's more of a 3 or a 4. In extreme cases, I've seen people with 9s and 10s. Now, there was absolutely no reason at all for me to believe that I was going to find Dogman. I just figured, hey, it's Saturday, I ain't got nothing to do, let's go on an adventure. So now I'm driving, following the directions, and it leads me to this parking lot. Just a parking lot, a few cars parked there, nothing more. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is some bullshit, nothing to worry about. That's until I noticed one of the trucks in the parking lot, decal on the back window. A simple silhouette of a wolf head with the words, "Bad Wolf." I say to myself, okay, that's strange, but it's not Dogman, so I head to the next spot. The next location, 18-20 miles away, small road right off Highway 49 in Sanford, Mississippi. I get there, get out of the car, and nothing's going on. Everything seems normal. Get back in the car, going to the next point, and it tells me to drive to Carrollton, Mississippi. Now, this drive to Carrollton ain't no short drive, but like I said, it's Saturday. I have absolutely nothing to do, so I'm driving, listening to the radio. When I get to Carrollton, directions take me down Grenada Road to Highway 100, and it tells me to stop in front of these people's house. A random house on the side of the road, and the point of interest is on the back side of these people's property. Now, this is Mississippi, and in Mississippi, you don't just be wandering on the people's property. And there was absolutely no way I was about to knock on these people's door, tell them that I want to go onto the back side of their property because I'm following an app that's leading me to a freaking werewolf. That wasn't happening, not doing it, so I get back in the car and proceed to the next spot. And right here is when my Dogman encounter really starts to get interesting, because the next point on this map is literally right outside of Taylor, Mississippi. Remember, I started in Hattiesburg. This is a lot of freaking driving. Now I'm headed down these back roads to Taylor. Highway 35 to Chadstone, then Highway 32 to 315. And I get to number 4 Club Road. And it stops me right along this right-of-way, directly underneath the power line, next to this body of water. Understand, I get out of the car, it's still broad daylight, but it is creepy as hell in this location. Listen, I'm less than a mile from that Highway 315, but you can't hear any cars. I'm alone on this right-of-way. And if you don't believe me, pull up Google Maps and look it up yourself. The app led me directly to that spot. As I get out of my car, I'm saying to myself, okay, this is definitely Dogman territory. And it was creepy, like I said, but nothing was happening. So I started walking around. I get about 40 to 50 yards away from my car. Driver's side door left open, car still running. Then shit starts to move in the trees. And when I say move in the trees, I mean something up in the trees starts to move. I ain't talking about like a squirrel running around in the trees. No birds fluttering around in the trees either. The top of the freaking trees starts swaying back and forth and moving. Standing there, looking at the trees, moving back and forth like something is jumping from tree to tree, saying to myself, holy shit, what did I get into? Now turning, moving back in the direction of my car, the freaking driver's side door is closed. I know I left it open. I did it on purpose in case I needed to run and get in my car. The son of a bitch is closed. Now seeing this, I start to panic and I'm running full speed to my vehicle. Behind me, I can hear the trees rustling and shaking as if whatever it was in the trees was jumping from tree to tree to tree, paralleling me as I ran back to my car. When I get to my car door, the fucking door is locked. Again, I left this car door open, the car running. There was no reason for my car door to be closed or locked. Now I'm there, yanking on the door handle, panicking, when I realize, holy crap, I have the electronic key to my car in my pocket. Listen to me when I tell you, I damn near broke my thumb hitting that button trying to get the car door open. Once I got into the car, foot on the gas, spinning around, damn near slammed into the transmission pole, trying to get the hell out of there. When I finally got away from the area, pulled over on the side of the highway just to get my wits about myself. Now, looking back on what happened, the one thing I can tell you is I am freaking glad that I did not make the mistake of going to that very same spot after dark. Because I'm not sure that I've been able to get my ass back up out of there alive.
When the world turns to sleep, the masters of the night come alive. Dark Waters channel, where storytelling is perfected and the late night is our realm. Our tales are spun with threads of shadow and light, designed to captivate, terrify, and enchant. Rule the night with us, where each story is a masterpiece waiting to be unveiled. Dark Waters channel, the masters of late night storytelling on YouTube.
This is the real research that I have heard, that I have talked to Army generals, commanding generals, major generals, generals, CIA, everybody, and they're all 100%. And it's unbelievable because, I mean, they 100% in San Francisco, and they are literally communicating, and they've got like astronaut level people taking super hardcore levels of drugs and going into meetings with these things and making intergalactic deals. And again, that's what the government believes and says they're doing.
So I worked as a nurse for about 10 years. Then my life took a terrible turn. I went through a divorce, and I started dating this guy named Lester. Now, Les was into the whole New Age thing. By the time we were dating 6 months, I started to discover that he was really into DMT tripping. Him and all his friends. By 7.5 months, he was encouraging me to give it a try, but I was so reluctant. My whole life, I'd never done any drugs. No cocaine, no marijuana, nothing, not even CBD oil. But I can tell you what changed my mind on using that drug. I had a terrible day at work. This 85-year-old woman comes in after suffering a massive heart attack. We're able to revive her and get her together, but then 2.5 hours later, she dies. The incidents of that night made me want to understand what was on the other side of the veil. I needed to know if there was something more than just this physical plane of existence that we currently live in. Where do we go when we die? My mind raced with all those type of questions. And based on what Les and his friends told me about their DMT experiences, it seems as if they were finding answers by doing this drug. So I decided to give it a try. It was a Saturday morning and less than an hour at home when I decided to smoke it. I took a hit of the bong, and at first nothing happened. I remember him saying, "Sit back, I want you to lay down on the sofa so you won't hurt yourself." And the next thing you know, I started going through this freaking tunnel. Colors swirling all around me. The most beautiful purples and yellows and oranges. And colors that I had never ever seen before, just swirling like a kaleidoscope. It was the most amazing, beautiful thing I had seen. Then, lollipops. Candy canes with odd and weird colors popping from left to right, dancing in front of me. I mean, this was insane. I remember trying to move my arms to grab one, and And that's when my body started to feel heavy. I felt as if I was sinking into the sofa and going underwater at the same time. That kaleidoscope began to slow down. The colors stopped, and then I found myself inside this forest. But it was freaky and weird. I wasn't standing in the forest. I was above the trees looking down at myself in the forest. But the trees were this royal blue color. And from my perspective, it was as if the trees themselves were breathing. They had this vibrating kind of motion to them, this swaying light back and forth, not as if a breeze was blowing, but as if they were actually sucking in air and were alive. It really, really was a beautiful sight to behold. I walked around amongst those trees, moving back and forth, but not from being on the ground amongst them, but above them. That's when the trees started to sway heavily. And I don't know if you call this my consciousness or my mind, but I was yanked from about 10,000 feet in the air above those trees down to the ground, to where I realized how tall and big they were. And that's when I heard it. This breathing sound, this heavy breathing, and this light growl. Then, from above the trees, I see this giant wolf. And I swear to you, it looked exactly like the Egyptian god Anubis, walking taller than the trees. He walks up to me, parts the trees, and looks down and says, "Worship me." I'm standing there looking up at this gigantic wolf, these yellow glowing eyes. And it says, "Worship me." It commands me to worship it. Worship me now. I don't even know how to explain what I was feeling at the moment because I wasn't quite scared. It was more of being confused, trying to figure out what this was or who this was. Then it said again, "Worship me now." I started to feel uncomfortable and I wanted to turn and move away. And as I turned my back and planted my feet to walk off, they were sucked into the ground and turned into these blue tree limbs. Then it spun me around and said again, "Worship me." And I said, "Who are you?" "Worship me" was the answer. "What are you?" "Worship me." I'm not worshiping something I don't know. I refuse to. Worship me now. I am the Spirit. I am the Great Spirit. Worship me now. This is really starting to freak me out at this point in time because I got a 30-foot tall freaking talking wolf telling me to worship it. So I asked the question, "Who worships you?" Then it kind of smiled, showing its teeth, and said, "Many worship me. Will you worship me?" My feet started to feel as if they were both hot and cold at the same time, this searing pain running up my legs and into my thighs. Worship me or die. I swear to you, it felt like I was with that thing for 5 hours. It commanded me over and over and over again to worship it. And then finally, the kaleidoscope started again. Colors started dancing around in front of me. The trees faded away. These little bitty babies started flying left and right, up and down, purple, pink, yellow, green children. And the next thing you knew, I was coming out of the DMT trip. When Lester asked me about what I saw, and I told him I saw the god Anubis and that it wanted me to worship him. He pulled out a little notebook and started writing the details of what I told him. Then he got on the phone and started calling some of his friends. About an hour later, we're sitting there having hamburgers. He says, "Well, I talked to everybody and nobody's experienced anything like what you talked about. For the most part, it's been the kaleidoscopes, colors, and freaky little weird beings, but nobody's experienced a gigantic wolf." As Les sat there biting into his hamburger and stuffing his mouth with french fries, he said, "The only thing I can think of is maybe, just maybe, it's because you listen to all that Dogman encounters. Maybe you made some kind of spiritual connection with the being itself."
This happened when I was 18 years old and I lived in Mississippi. It was the summer after high school and I had no direction. My mom was bitching to me about staying in the house all day and not being productive. I decided to get a job with my friend Lucas at Waffle House. figured I could kill two birds with one stone, hang out, and save some money. As it turns out, they moved Lucas back to the day shift. During this time, part of my job was taking out the trash. For some reason, they wanted me to take the trash out in the wee hours of the morning. I don't know why you need to take the trash out at 2:30 a.m. Later, I learned that the manager had an unwritten rule. The new kid on the block got the nastiest work assignments. You know, cleaning shitty bathrooms, taking out the trash, dealing with drunk, unruly customers. That kind of stuff. That was my responsibility. Now let me say this. I'm not complaining. I'm just pointing out that I was the work bitch. The first time something strange happened, it was early on a Saturday morning. I'm taking out the trash. It's around 2:30 a.m. and I hear this growling sound. It sounded like a dog, but it was much louder and bigger than any dog growl I ever heard. In fact, the growl was so loud that the plastic dumpster lid started to vibrate in my hand. Needless to say, I threw the trash in the dumpster and I headed back in real quick. The next morning, the same thing happened again. And after that, I refused to take out the trash for over a week. During that time, I was waiting to see if anyone else would say they experienced something weird. But nothing. Now, I'm thinking I'm going crazy, and I decided to let go of the fear and get back to my job. It was about a week later. It was a Thursday night, early Friday morning, and I'm back there taking out the trash. The person who worked the day shift had left early, so there was a lot more trash, maybe like 5 trips. On my third trip, I hear the same growl again. And this time, when I looked over to the wood line, out steps a creature that looks like a wolf. It was standing on 2 legs. It had long black fur, long black ears, and it looked like it had gotten into a fight. There were scars and scratches on its rib cage and shoulders. It looked at me, looking at him, then it dropped down on all 4s, and it ran back into the woods. I went inside. And you know how you get in a zone when someone is talking to you and you hear them, but at the same time your mind is not processing what's being said? That's how I was. I just stood there for about 5 minutes, watching people walk back and forth, and when I finally snapped out of it, my manager was asking me to finish taking out the rest of the trash. Screw this, I said. Walked out the front door, hopped in my car, and I went home. I'm not sure if that was a Dogman you've been talking about, but I also don't want to know. A month later, Lucas quit too, right after he got moved back to the night shift. For the longest time, he wouldn't tell me why he quit, but when he did, it was because he saw the same thing too.
Hey! If any of you are looking for any last-minute gift ideas for me, I have one. I like Frank Shirley, my boss, right here tonight. I want him brought from his happy holiday slumber over there on Melody Lane with all the other rich people. And I want him brought right here with a big ribbon on his head. And I want to look him straight in the eye, and I want to tell him what a cheap, lying, no-good, rotten, four-flushing, low-life, snake-licking, dirt-eating, inbred, overstuffed, ignorant, blood-sucking, dog-kissing, brainless, dickless, hopeless, heartless, fat-ass, bug-eyed, stiff-legged, spotty-lipped, worm-headed sack of monkey shit he is! Hallelujah! Holy shit! Where's the Tylenol?
I cannot stand Christmas. And I mean it. I can't stand the holiday. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Jesus and the whole concept of Christmas being his birthday. But I don't like the fact that the tradition of Christmas is all about spending your money. Money that you don't have. On top of that, every year my wife wants me to decorate the house. Now, we live about 2 miles away from the nearest road. And then, on top of that, there's the light bill that comes after Christmas. It's like a late Christmas gift. Then there's the endless rows of lights and checking the fucking bulbs and Christmas. You know what it is. Now that I've got that off my chest, this particular Christmas, my wife Sarah was excited like every other Christmas. And I don't know where she gets this from. Maybe when she was a kid, she didn't get a lot of presents for Christmas, but and I think this whole thing is a matter of her overcompensating for her childhood. Don't get me wrong, I love my wife. She's my best friend. But I hate doing all the shit for Christmas. It's kind of like the kid who never went to Disney World. They grow up to be an adult, then they go to Disney World every year. I mean, like, how many times do you need to see Space Mountain, right? Anyway, Sarah comes home with these light up reindeers that she wants on the roof and a fucking blow up Santa. This thing has an air pump and it blows air into it and it goes up to be like 9 feet tall. She pulls all this crap out of the car and it's like, baby, this is going to look so beautiful. And again, I love my wife to death. And even though I'm talking shit about her right now, she's the best woman in the world. So I start the process of setting up the lights on the house. Then the lights in the bushes. Next, the lights on the roof. And I'm trying to get these damn reindeer to stay still on the roof because they keep sliding down. After about 6 hours outside in the cold, all I have to do next is inflate the damn Santa and strap them down. And then I'm done. So I finish. I go inside, I get Sarah and the kids. And guess what? She's right. The thing looks fucking amazing. Never mind that she did absolutely no work. All she did was go to the store and buy it and take the box out of the car. But it was absolutely amazing looking. Wife and kids are happy. Christmas comes and goes. Now, Sarah has this rule where all the Christmas decorations have to stay up until New Year's. So every night she will go outside and plug them up. This particular night, she went outside to plug them up. And when she came back in, she said, boy, it's quiet out there. It's so quiet, it's scary. Me, I'm thinking nothing of it because I'm watching ESPN. A few hours later, I fall asleep on the sofa and I wake up, my wife is in bed. Now I'm in the kitchen, grab me a glass of water when I see this shadow go past the front window. A huge shadow. And I'm like, who the hell is outside of my house? Now the only light that's on inside of the house is this little ugly troll lamp that my mother-in-law gave us as a Christmas present. So I creep up to the window and I peek through the curtains. And that's when I saw it. It looked like a black wolf on all fours right next to Santa. Now, this wasn't strange to me because we have wolves in the area. So I figured this is going to be interesting because this wolf is about to piss all over Santa. This is going to be funny. Well, it was all fun and games until this thing stood up on 2 legs, and I got a much better look at it. It had to be about 300 to 350 pounds. And that's when it starts fucking biting Santa, snarling and growling. Then it drops back down on all fours and ran off into the wood line along the side of my property. At first, I thought I was dreaming. You know how you wake up inside a dream, but you're still dreaming? That's what I thought was going on. I figured, this is some type of metaphor for how much I fucking hate Christmas. So much that this wolf bit Santa. So I pinch myself, and the pain lets me know that this is real. A giant wolf has just chewed on Santa. So I walk into the bedroom. I got in bed with my wife, still in disbelief. The next morning, when she went outside to turn off the lights, I hear her saying, Santa's broken. But when I went outside and took a look at it, Santa had a piece bitten out of him right at the back of his neck. And that's when I realized, for sure, I was not dreaming. Also, that whatever this thing was, it was big enough to bite something 8 to 9 feet in the air. I haven't seen it since. I didn't tell my wife about it. Next Christmas, though, I'll do all the lights and the reindeer, but I'm not putting Santa back up.
Luckau, Germany, Dogman encounter. Let me start by saying this. My family has owned this property in Germany since the 1600s. Farmland where we raise cattle. And since the 1600s, my family has split its time between raising cattle and fishing in a lagoon nearby. Now, I realize most of you listening to the story have never and probably will never visit Germany. This is beautiful country with dense forests and great people. And to this day, we still live by the old traditions. Neighbors helping neighbors. Now, as for what you call Dogman, my family has known about these creatures for centuries. Upright walking wolves. Yes, I said it. They walk on their hind legs, fast and strong.
As a boy, I witnessed one of these things attack a full-grown bull, snap its neck, then shred this thing into pieces. That evening, I was with my father and we were crossing one of our neighbor's property, and I watched as this thing completely destroyed this bull. And it was on that day that my father shared this information with me. He told me that they migrated across borders around the lagoon into Poland and Lithuania, and these creatures had been seen as far away as Estonia. And I can still remember it. That evening, I was absolutely terrified. But my father just took a glance and kept on walking, pretty much ignoring this creature. Later, when we got home and I asked him, Dad, weren't you afraid of this creature? How could you just walk past and ignore what was going on? That's when he told me that they can smell your fear. It drives them crazy. And once you are afraid enough, then they will kill you and eat you. Sitting there across the table from my father, I know I had to be looking at him like he was crazy. But he went on further and explained to me that fear makes our blood smell stronger. And that same fear releases chemicals that makes our blood taste better to these creatures. That day, my dad told me, if you're not afraid, the creatures will just leave you alone. Fast forward 55 years to this day. We still own our family's land. And 4 years ago, we purchased our neighbor's land where we had that encounter. Now, on the backside of that piece of property, there is this hollow. Deep, spooky. I'm talking about a place where the sun doesn't shine in the daytime. And in the morning times, it holds this unnatural fog and moisture that makes the place like something out of a horror movie. And I remember venturing there as a young man. My friends and I always believed that that place was evil. You could feel it when you were there. Standing at the top of that hollow looking down, you could feel it, like something was there waiting on you to venture down into the area. Now, as for my encounter with 3 of these creatures, it all started when my wife's dog took off running out of the back door early in the morning at 6:30. Picture this, we're at the table having breakfast and the dog bolts out of the door. Now, in my mind, he just needs to handle his business, so I'm thinking nothing of it. 2 hours later, I'm moving around back and forth around the house doing chores, and my wife says, "Hey, honey, where's the dog?" Again, we own a huge piece of property, so it's nothing for that dog to run off, get distracted, and then come back hours later. So I'm thinking nothing of it. 5 hours pass, and my wife mentions it again. But this time, the look on her face is one of worry. She says, "Honey, I need you to go find my dog. I have a very bad feeling that he's in trouble." So I hop on my side-by-side and start riding around the property looking for the dog. I ride the entire length of our original property. No sign of the dog. Then I move over to our newly acquired property, start riding around. Nothing. The only place left for this dog to be was hit by a car along the roadway, or he was back in that hollow. So I head on over in that direction. I started riding along the ridge line above the hollow. And that's when I start to hear him barking. Getting off the side-by-side, I say, "Hey, come here, boy. Come here. Here, boy. Here, boy. Come here. Come here." But nothing. Just this constant barking. Now, I didn't want to go down in this hollow, but at the same time, I didn't want to go back and explain to my wife that I didn't go down there to get her dog because I was afraid of what might be down there. So I started making my way down. And I just need to explain something to you. This hollow is steep. We ain't talking about going down on a gradual angle. I literally have to hold on to trees and grab rocks, sliding my way down. And when I get to the bottom, although it's about 2 to 3 o'clock in the evening, it's pretty much freaking dark down here. Picture this. I hear the barking and I'm moving along slowly, closing in on him. And being down there is like being submerged into a whole nother world. It's completely quiet down here with the exception of my dog barking. And listen to this. When I finally got to him, somehow my dog's collar, was caught on this curved down tree branch. Looking at it, it was impossible for this dog to do this on his own. It was almost as if something or someone picked him up, slid his collar onto this branch, and gently placed him down on top of a log, essentially trapping my dog right there in that spot. Now, first I tried to pick him up, lifting him off the branch, but my dog is a German Shepherd and he's too freaking heavy for that. So now I'm down on my knees and I'm trying to unbuckle his collar when I start to hear movement coming up behind me. This quick, choppy pattering, like something is running up on me. And when I turn around, I find myself face to face with one of these creatures. These gigantic teeth and jaws, wet snout, and these piercing yellow eyes staring directly at me. Now pause for a second. Let me explain something to you about the size of these animals. The best way for me to describe the sheer mass and size of the head of this animal and relay it to you in terms of something that you may possibly understand is, if you're sitting down in a chair, any freaking chair, the area in which your butt rests on is about the width of the size of this thing's head. And to make you understand the size of this thing's eyes, take any spray can you can find, flip it upside down, and look at the bottom, and that is the size of this thing's eyes. It is there, right there in my face, snarling at me. I can smell every breath and feel the air as it comes out of its wet nostrils. That's how close, and in the back of my mind, all I could hear was my dead father's voice saying, "Don't show them any fear. They feed off fear. If it realizes that you are afraid, this thing will kill you." Now there is no way on earth that I'm going to sit here and lie to you and tell you I was not shocked, startled, and afraid. But you need to understand something, and what this boils down to is that fear ultimately is a choice. So I decided to turn my head from that creature, grab him by the back of the neck, stand up, and try to walk away. The dog is shaking, shivering, and urinating on himself. And then my dog starts to look around. Forcing my eyes to look as well. And in the distance, I see two more of these things, one on all fours and one standing up next to a tree. That's when it hit me. These sons of bitches had set up an ambush for me. They wanted me down in that hollow. There's no telling how long they had been watching me and my family. And it was in that moment that I decided that, you know what? I'm walking back up out of this hollow with my fucking dog, and I don't give a shit what they try to do. So I start walking off, literally dragging the dog, walking in the only direction where I wouldn't have a direct encounter with one of these creatures. And listen to me, every molecule of my body was telling me to run, but I refused to. I walked straight, upright, and confidently away from these creatures. We get about 10 to 12 yards away, and my fucking dog takes off running up the side of that hollow and leaves me. And so now I find myself down there alone, holding on to trees, trying to climb my way back out of there. Behind me, I can still hear the breathing and growling of these creatures. I get halfway up the side of that ridge, and there's nothing but rocks on the ground for me to grab onto and start pulling myself up. And listen to me, when I finally turned and looked, that same one that was right up in my face was standing on two legs, head cocked to the side, looking at me. Reading its face, it gave me the impression that it was disgusted, like, this bastard is not afraid of me. And no, I was afraid. I just refused to show the fact that I was afraid. It took me another harrowing 15 minutes to climb back up out of that hollow. And when I got to the top of the ridge, I had to walk back around to get to my side-by-side and drive back home. Driving away and heading back home
My body was so pumped full of adrenaline that my hands were shaking and my eyes were twitching. I pull up to the house and my dog is laying there at the back door. And honestly, in that moment, I was pissed because he left me. So I kick him and go into the house. When I finally sit down at the table, my wife starts to question me about where I was and where I found the dog. Now she, like everyone else in the area, knows about these creatures. So when I start to explain to her what happened, my wife suggests that we contact one of the local lumber mills and actually donate the trees in the holler to them. That way, they would go down in there and cut them down for free, hauling all that lumber out of there and moving those creatures off of our property. And within 2 weeks, we had them out there cutting every freaking tree down in that holler. Now, I want to be extra clear with you. That didn't put an end to these things migrating across our property. But what it did was remove a place for them to congregate and hang out on my property. My wife and I both have seen them since then. And I'm pretty sure I saw one of them peeking into my house about 6 months ago. But I've never had an incident like that again.
What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? It's the one and only James Williams Darkwaters, and I'm back, and this is a part of Bigfoot Weekend. I'm excited to have you guys on board with me, and if you've been listening to the content and you like what you've heard so far, make sure you hit the like button. If you're new, subscribe. If you're one of the people who are very, very new, because we're growing by about 1,000 people per day, make sure that you not only subscribe, but to each and every person who's been on this interview series and participated in this, make sure you go out and find their channels and subscribe. Look at the description. I'm going to have a link to everyone who participated so you can show them some love. It's very important that we spread the love around this community. It reduces the competition and all the beef and all the strife and the drama if we all work together. With that being said, I have Johnny Two Bears on here with me today. We're going to have some conversation about the world of Bigfoot, specifically from a researcher's perspective. And if you guys don't know, there's a couple of angles that people target when you talk about research. There's researchers who research by reading books and reading Facebook, and then there's field researchers, people who actually go out in the woods in the middle of the night and mess around where monsters are. And I know that Johnny's one of those field researchers. Johnny, how you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing good, man. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited about having you on. Let's start here. Most of the time when people get into this Bigfoot realm or the world of cryptids, they either start as a young man or a kid where they have some kind of encounter or experience, or they kind of get infatuated with the subject as an adult and then they kind of dive deep into it. Was it something that you came across as a kid, or was it something that you found yourself being involved with as an adult?
No, actually, it was as an adult. It was kind of a matter of circumstance. I didn't care much for the topic at all. Didn't know anybody that did. But in 2012, I live in Georgia. I live about 40 miles outside of Atlanta. And my wife and I purchased a home in 2012 that kind of sits back on property back in the woods. And we have a wildlife management area behind us. And it honestly started with crazy stuff happening at night. And it was actually more... At first, it was more focused towards my neighbor, like really harassing type of stuff, like beating on the house and rocks getting thrown and sticks being thrown. And I thought it was people creeping around at night. First, I thought it was kids. And then it got to the point to where it was like these kids are really good at what they're doing. So then I started thinking adult. And then, I don't know, man. It probably took me about 9 months, and I honestly can't even tell you why I started thinking Bigfoot. I just had a bunch of weird things happen that I could not figure out. And that's what got me started at about 20. The activity didn't start right away. It probably started around 2017. By about 2018, I was sitting on about 50-50 on I was dealing with humans or I was dealing with, if this Bigfoot thing's real, maybe it's that. And I just started, doing research online. 90% of the research I did was just listening to podcasts, just like yours. I found over the years that just listening to witnesses, and you can really, really get some good information on what they experience, what these creatures do, and it's just kind of a pattern recognition. You see the same things over and over again, and I'd hear something on a podcast, and then it would happen around here, or it would happen around here, and then I'd hear something on the podcast. So it was just kind of a gradual buildup. It was probably, I guess, about close to 2019 when I had already purchased my first. I spent like $500 on a thermal, and I was getting serious. One thing, it was scaring my wife, all the activity, and it was really getting to the point to where it was kind of ticking me off. And I'm prior military, and it was really starting to get like a pride thing. Like my family didn't feel safe, and I just couldn't get answers. And so one summer, I actually had to have 2 surgeries in a row. I had a rotator cuff surgery, and then a few months later, I had a disc replaced in my neck. Well, I was out of work while I was recovering, and I got this wild hair. I'm like, man, I'm just going to start doing armed patrols at night around my property. And there's, I don't know, about 100 yards behind my house, there had been a few things happen. I started finding, I didn't know it at the time, but what people consider structures, rock stacks, stuff like that. So I started going out there at night, armed with a flashlight. And I'd just walk around and be a pest. I'd be loud. I'd kick. If I'd see something look like it was made, I'd kick it, break it, pull it apart. Just being an absolute jerk, basically, just out of frustration. And I did that for about a week. Nothing happened. And then one afternoon, I was building my kid's treehouse, and it's kind of on my side yard. And I've got a horse fence, and on the other side of that horse fence is the wood line that separates my house and my neighbor's house. Well, it's probably about an hour before the sun goes down. I get done working. I sit on my porch, and I'm sitting there just chilling out, drinking some coffee. And back behind the treehouse, on the other side of the horse fence, there's a hill, and it goes down where there's a tree. It's about as big around as a soccer ball. And that tree just starts shaking like crazy. Like it was impossible for a man to do with his bare hands. Watching it was surreal. It was kind of shocking. But I jumped up, I ran out there, and because of that hill, you can't see like the bottom 10 feet of the tree. I ran out there and I didn't see anything. But I'm like, oh man, I'd never had anything happen during the day like that. And I'm like, well, tonight I'm doing my patrol. So I get all my stuff together. I've got German Shepherds, and I got a flashlight, a cheap parabolic, a thermal, and a pistol. And I open the front door, and my dogs go straight to that same fence right behind the treehouse where the tree was shaking earlier that day. And I'm like, all right, it's on now. I'm about to figure out what this is. So I ran out there, went out of the gate, and there's a little trail back there, and I kind of went to the top of the trail. I walked about 10 feet down the trail, and rocks started falling all around me. Well, I backed up, and I'm like getting my bearings. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Now I'm thinking, I'm like, all right, it's a person. So I start going down the trail again, and rocks start falling around me again. Well, at this time, I'm ticked, and I yell out, "If you hit me with a rock, I'm going to shoot you." Well, nothing happens. So I go down that trail. There's a little pine thicket. I found out later on that's actually where I think they were bedding at. But I go down there in that pine thicket. I'm looking around through the trails. I'm down there about 10, 15 minutes. I don't see anything. I walk back up to the top of the trail, and I'm standing there looking into my neighbor's backyard with my thermal. And off to my right from the trail that I just came from 30 feet away, one of these things growls at me. And it was instantaneous. I knew right then and there what it was. I'd never heard anything like it. I'd never been between the Marine Corps and the fire department. I've been in some, kind of hairy situations, but and you just kind of get used to that kind of stuff. And I honestly, I don't remember ever being that afraid in my life. I had a pistol on my hip, but it was so close, and I knew instantaneously that if it got up on me that quickly or that quietly and got that close, that there was nothing I could do. So I just stood there, and all I said was, "All right, man, I get it. I'm leaving." I stood there for about 3 minutes, just completely still, waiting to, I even had a flashlight in my hand, but I didn't turn it on. I didn't do anything. I just stood there. And so I just start backing up. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything after that. And that was pretty much the beginning. I was hooked. Now I went from, it'd be another year before I actually saw one out here. And it was actually, as deep down the rabbit hole as I went, is actually pretty boring sighting. I was sitting on my front porch, and the thing comes walking. My driveway goes across the front of my house at an angle. I'm just sitting out there on my front porch at night, and I see one walking. I see him for about 6 or 8 seconds. The right side profile, full body silhouette. I've got a neighbor about 100 yards in front of me, and all their lights are on, and it's wintertime. So it's kind of like you see in the movies where the monster walks in front of the movie screen. Well, that's exactly what I saw. Wow. And I saw it, and I knew what I was looking at, but then I stood up. I saw its right side, and then I stood up, and when I stood up, it turned towards me. And you hear it all the time. You hear people say these things are 4 feet wide. They are not lying. This thing was every bit of 4 feet wide. And the funny thing is, so it's walking kind of at an angle, and I see its right side. And when it turns its upper body, it turns it towards me, but its legs just keep going in the direction it was going. And then it turned back, and then it was out of my sight. So that was the first time I saw one. That was, I think it was 2018 was when I saw it. So after that, I just went down the rabbit hole. Main thing I wanted to do is, when you get into doing this and you realize they're real, there's kind of one goal after another. First, it was for me to confirm that these things were real. I was a skeptic. But I confirmed it was real. Then I had a sighting at night. And then the next thing was, well, I want to see if all these other people are telling the truth. Are they really all over the place? Can you go out to these areas, like go to North Georgia or go to, Tennessee or wherever, and find their habitat? And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to find these things, and I wanted to have a daytime sighting, because even as clear as I was, even as convinced as I was still only like 98%, because I didn't see it during the day. I always kind of left in the back of my head, what if I'm wrong? But what I saw was what I saw. I've never seen a human that big in my life. The growl, I've since then, I think 2 years later, I've actually recorded that growl from back behind my house. Same exact growl, except when I heard it, I was 30 feet away. But so I wanted to start getting out and, you know, trying to find these things, figure out how I could actually go and find them and then learn more about it. Well, I had started a little Facebook group, and the focus of the group is I was just trying to find research partners. That's all I was trying to do. Now we have team members that are in the BFRO. I know some people have their opinions of it or whatever, but the BFRO is made up of so many different people that, I mean, I've met a lot of good people through that organization. I'm not a part of it, but, you know, I kind of went down that road. I started looking at different organizations and all this other stuff. And the more just listening to podcasts and kind of talking here and there to other researchers, I just really figured it wasn't rocket science. That I think I could do this myself. Well, in that little group, I had made a couple friends, and one of those friends, his name is Captain Joe Cayley. He was a captain in the Army. He was an Army Ranger, and he's actually a bona fide war hero. He lost his leg saving 3 civilians in Iraq. Well, I served in Iraq too, and so that's kind of how we started talking. And then he kind of opened up to me about his sighting. I think it's been about 4 years now. But he was running a sniper challenge on a military base here in Georgia. He's real big into long distance shooting. He actually works for it's a television program called The Pig Man. They go around all over hunting different stuff. But he's in charge of like their marketing and long distance shooting and all that stuff. So he reached out to me to tell me about his sighting, and basically he was on a rifle range, put together the sniper challenge, and he's spotting for all these different shooters. And as they're shooting, he sees a Sasquatch about 1,200 yards back behind the main berm cross the road. And they wound up, it was a big deal. They wound up having to stop the shooting competition and all this other stuff. And now he's using a spotting scope. So 1,200 yards is nothing. You know, he got a really, really, really good look at this thing. And he told me about it and everything. And I started making videos about all the stuff that happened around here. And then we just kind of, we've got another member. Her name is Angie Williamson. She's actually a parole officer. Really good at documentation, really good at doing, taking people's reports and all that good stuff, making